organizing this program. The program is wonderful in and of itself, but to extend to me the invitation to speak at the program is personally very significant. And to get here and find out that I am the first keynote speaker in this room says a lot. It says to me I need to say something about something. Let me say, as an alumni of this school, coming back on the campus after so many years, it's almost like returning to the scene of the crime. Because in some sense, I still see myself as the young man driving the 1966 Mustang with the afro and the blue jeans and the desert boots, committed to changing the world and committed to changing the University of Houston. And can't get in those jeans anymore because they're too fat. Mustang only runs half of the time, but I still have it. And I graduated from desert boots to ostrich boots. But I recognize in those many years, change has happened. Change has happened here at the University of Houston. And I'm really proud of that change. And I wish the Chancellor was here because I want to personally commend her for great work that she has done in moving this school forward. She's a dynamic leader. And my friend, the President of the Board, Jarvis Hollingsworth, and the Board of Regents, doing a phenomenal job. U of H has a great, great future. And because it has a great future, it's important to look at U of H in the context of where the world is now, but more importantly, where the world was way back when. So I've kind of chosen for a topic today, looking back to look forward. Yes, I believe there are some lessons from the past that we can learn. And many of those lessons, though moving as the video was, those lessons can't be learned from film clips of the civil rights movement. Can't be learned from newspaper clippings of the time way back when. In order to really learn the past, we've got to dissect the past and dissect the civil rights movement. When you do that, I come away with one fundamental premise. The civil rights movement, along with the American Revolution and the Civil War, are the three most important reshapers of American society. Now, that's a thesis paper for somebody to go and start researching now. Because in the real world, we need to challenge our academicians, our intellectuals who are here, to look at and help our country look at what we've just gone through. There literally has been a fundamental change in America in the last 50 years. Don't believe it? 20 years before the Civil Rights Bill was passed, there was some man in Germany saying white folks are superior to everybody and we're going to take the world. How do you go from that madness to this situation today? It's because people were inspired to change this country. And in changing the country, we help to change the world. So let's look back. In order for the young people here in particular, you didn't live it. It's a faint memory. You're trying to dissect it, understand what it was like. And it's really hard to understand where the world was 50 years ago. So I just have a couple of things that I want to kind of point out to make you think about. With regard to the world, 50 years ago, European domination was on the way out. Colonialism was coming to an end, and emerging nations across the world were demanding a new world order, change. 50 years ago, in America, as the film indicated, the civil rights movement was the domestic issue of our times. The domestic history. The civil rights movement was forcing Americans to come to grips with this ugly truth about itself. And that is, at that time, we were two nations. separated by race. One equal, one unequal. It's difficult to explain to young people now what it meant to live in a segregated America. 50 years ago, 1964, I'm still in high school. I'm in East Texas. And I saw segregation and lived through it in really a painful way. Everything was segregated. Restaurants, so I had to eat at the back. Theaters, so I had to sit in the balcony. Restrooms, so I had to go to the dirty one, if there was a dirty one. Schools, yeah, I had to go to the school that didn't have the best books, or the best equipment, or even a football field sometimes. Playgrounds, yeah, I had to go to one that didn't have equipment, and never really got any financing. And you go on and on and on. Churches, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, the most segregated hour in America. Hell, even cemeteries were segregated. I guess that was because there was some fear that white folks and black folks, when they're dead, would somehow get together and embarrass the Jim Crow South. In that background, imagine what it does to the psyche of a young African American. For me, until I came to this school at the University of Houston, I never in my life had had a single encounter with a white person where I was on equal footing. I always was there with a sense of inferiority because there was a growing belief and a prevalent belief that white supremacy was the order of the day, that some people were inferior and some people were inferior. Now, imagine what that does to a black kid. But imagine what it did to white kids. White kids who knew better, but lived in a household where they couldn't express what they knew. Kind of screwed us all up. And you want to know why America still has race problems. You trace it back to the thought pattern, the ideas of the Jim Crow South. Now, at a different time, in a different era, we'll talk about the relationship between economics and segregation, who benefited and who didn't. We don't have time for that discussion today, but it's an interesting phenomenon to dissect. 50 years ago in this city, in Houston, we had a city that was booming and on the verge of breaking out into becoming this great global cosmopolitan city that it is. But 50 years ago, the legacy of being a city in the South was still very prevalent in Houston. And so on the one hand, you had people who were extremely enlightened and wanted to move forward. On the other hand, you had bastions of discrimination and segregation that were abound everywhere. And in the midst of that, you had most Houstonians who were not themselves racial haters, but who didn't want to buck or challenge the status quo. Just let it be as it is. And can't we all get along? Knowing that we all get along in a system where some people are on top and some people are on the bottom. Houston was begging for change. 50 years ago, the University of Houston, newly state-supported, had previously been a private, segregated institution, was now an integrated public institution open for all. Something interesting about U of H. Way back then in 1964, when I started researching and decided I wanted to come to this school, U of H had an identity crisis, and U of H was sucking up for recognition. Now, fast forward 50 years, Cougars, because we're all part of the same family, we can talk the truth among ourselves, we still have an identity crisis. We're still sucking up, wanting to be, and get the recognition. And I have said then, and I say now, this school is inherently great if we just allow our talent and our resources to bud out. Who cares what the folks in Austin do? Who cares what the people at College Station do? They are them. We are us. Now, I'm deviating, but it's important. Another sermon for another day. It's important to recognize this school, and here's the point about 50 years ago at U of H. Newly integrated, but the school did nothing to adjust to its new integrated status. In fact, I assert that the burden of integrating the school fell on the backs of black students coming in. And if you want to know why black students who went to the University of Houston who are my age still have a complex about U of H, still have conflicted loyalties about this school, it's because the institution did not do what it could have done on the verge of integration. Now, put a pin in that. Put a pin in that because it's instructive for our history going forward. So now, we are 50 years ago in Jim Crow America, in Houston, at the University of Houston, and the civil rights movement is abound. The civil rights movement is confronting one basic theme, and that is some people are better than others based on their race. As long as this theme can be dominant, as long as this theme can permeate society, it leads us to a lot of other faulty thinking about other things. If you accept the premise that white people are better than black people, then you can accept the premise that men are superior than women, and then women ought to take a back seat. If you accept the premise that white people are better than black people, then you can take the position that Christians are more superior than Jews or Muslims, and that non-Christians ought to be a suspect. If you accept the premise that black people are inferior to white people, then you can accept the premise, as crazy as it is, that a person who looks like he's Mexican or El Salvadorian or Pakistani or Indian or Iranian or Turkish or Vietnamese doesn't look like a true American, so they can't be a true American because true Americans don't look like them. If you accept the premise that black people are inferior to white people, then you can accept the premise that the poor are poor because they don't want to work. If you accept the premise that black people are inferior to white people, then you can accept the premise that it's okay to discriminate, harass, and undo gays and lesbian and transgender people because they are different. And I don't like the way they are different. And I don't approve of it. It's faulty thinking that kind of runs in an intellectual line. And when you put it together, what the civil rights movement did, starting with issues to race, was to take the genie out of the bottle and get everybody to start looking at America in a different light. And so by 1964, it's not just blacks, Hispanics, Asians, women are all up in arms about what the hell is going on in this country and why am I treated like I'm treated. With that collective groundswell, we begin the fundamental change that results from the civil rights movement. So, why do I have the premise that the civil rights movement was one of the three great reshapers of American society? It's because the facts support my premise. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about a couple of things about the civil rights movement that are not studied regularly, and then I'll be through. I want to talk about certain truths that are just not recognized. I call them unknown truths. Example, it's a known truth that men like Dr. King, Medgar Evers, women like Dorothy Height were great leaders in the civil rights movement. People of courage, of character, who were able to take our country to a place. We should always honor and respect them. That's a known truth. Everybody kind of accepts that. What's an unknown truth is that the heart and soul of the civil rights movement was with regular people, unnamed, unknown, who've never gotten the credit, but who provided the energy, the soul, the excitement, the prayer, the willingness to move forward that allowed the leaders in the civil rights movement to move on. And so we need to praise these leaders. But don't think for a minute that they were out there on an island by themselves. There were people that you know, people that you've seen and don't know what they're doing, who helped to make this movement what it was. I speak this from personal experience. I was very fortunate when I left the University of Houston. I have the sole distinction of being the only graduate in this institution that in one semester would get both a BA degree in political science and a charge for inciting a riot. Great distinction. Well, I had to go to trial on this charge of inciting a riot. Now, you students, you may experience a little tension and anxiety when it's finals time. You might pump the caffeine and get ready and go up. But there's no tension like going to the courthouse, knowing that what's at stake is whether or not you're going to spend the next 2 years in jail. But yet, in 1970, that was my fate. And what I remember most was we didn't have money for lawyers, but people gave money. People gave money on street corners. People gave money in churches. People gave money in concerts. Little old ladies, many of whom uneducated and poorly spoken, would say, boy, I'm with you. I know you're doing the right thing. Son, God's going to bless you. It's going to be all right. We're praying for you. The words of encouragement that I got from Houstonians during the 2 weeks that I was at trial convinced me that we need to honor the foot soldiers in the movement more than we have. Another untold truth. Some of the participants in the civil rights movement ought to be more highly honored than they are right now. They literally were heroes, patriots, in the same way that there were patriots and heroes in the American Revolution, or patriots and heroes from the Civil War. But we've used the jargon political activist, protester. It never gives the dignity to the value of the work that these men and women who put their lives on the line. And so just as an exhibition, for those of you who are real students here and not just spending time at the University of Houston, if you are shown up for real a student here, I want you to go back and Google Civil Rights Memorial or the Southern Poverty Law Center, Montgomery, Alabama. They've got an exhibit that honors just 40 people who died in the civil rights movement. 32 blacks, 8 whites. And I want you to read about each and every one of those folks. And then I want you to seriously consider whether one or more of them ought not be candidates for a paper that you should write and educate your instructors on who the real heroes of the civil rights movement were. Third and final untruth. We don't recognize that 1964 was the turning point in the civil rights movement. A lot of us old heads here remember that we went from 64, Civil Rights Act, 65, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, and all of a sudden, legislatively, we had accomplished much. The groundwork had been set legislatively. But issues of poverty and economic injustice had not been touched. It's 1964 and 65 when Dr. Martin Luther King clearly went into a second gear. Away from just discussions of integration and civil rights to questions of economic opportunity, poverty, and how could a country so rich treat its people so poorly. And what really kind of gets me going in January every year at MLK is that people routinely run out the I have a dream speech. Stop it there, and that's it. They forget about King 65, 66, 67, and 68. They want to talk about the campaign against poverty because that acknowledges there are poor people in this country and there's something wrong in the country. Don't want to talk about the fact that he was in Memphis shot down helping garbage workers. They just want to stop the discussion right there. That's intellectually dishonest. And because it's intellectually dishonest, I'm sure you as students here will not engage in that. I'm sure you will be involved in telling the whole story. Now, I get burned up about it for a couple of reasons. One, because it's just wrong. And secondly, because I see that people are taking the MLK holiday and they're getting kind of a twist to it to make us all feel comfortable with it. There are some great things that come out of the civil rights movement, but they're great only because there were some ugly things that fueled it. And you can't have one without the other. And it's okay. We're big boys and girls. We're Americans now. We can talk about that and move on. Nobody's holding it anymore. It's over. It's done. But we've got to at least acknowledge that it happened. So you can imagine, I'm sitting, I have a place in East Texas. I'm sitting there on Monday, the holiday, and I'm going through my email, and I get an email from a Republican candidate for statewide office. He'll go unnamed. But he sends an email out to his constituents or would-be voters honoring Dr. King, talking about the great work of Dr. King. And at first blush, I was impressed. But as I began to read, it's almost as if he had married himself to the idea that we shouldn't have race as an issue in this country, and he just stopped. Because he then went from talking about how he was with Dr. King on that issue to if Dr. King were alive today, Dr. King would be with him in fighting the atrocities of the federal government and President Barack Obama. And I'm saying to myself, what planet is this man living on? So this intellectual dishonesty is abound, and is most prevalent in politics. Help me tell the truth about the civil rights movement. Learn, study, understand the depth of it. When you do that, you'll understand how important it was to American society and why we are at this fundamental point now. I never will be one to say that we've arrived. That's not my deal. But I'm not one to not recognize from whence we've come. Tremendous, tremendous progress. And I can say I love this country because we've made this progress. We've made it without anybody having to pick up an AK-47 and shooting somebody. And that's miraculous, because most countries in the world have to go through violence before they can get to this point. It's a tribute to America, and it ought to be honored in that respect. So I'm going to close with just 3 little quick lessons that I think I've learned from the civil rights movement. Lesson number 1, change is inevitable. Whether we like it or not, change is inevitable. It's only a question of whether it's good change or bad change, and what's your role in making the change. With that, I'll let you think about what your role is going to be in making change, because change is going to happen. Number 2, our society is really now a class society. There are class divisions that are pronounced in America. Divisions that are so pronounced that we see the middle class vanishing. And the notion of upward mobility, it's kind of difficult to discern if it still exists. In the midst of these class divisions, education is the only opportunity that some people have to go forward. So I am a big supporter of public education. I'm a big supporter of universities reaching out to the neighboring communities and making a difference. Somewhere in the inner city school in Houston, Texas, there's a Jarvis Hollingsworth. He's not the valedictorian of his class, but he's somebody who's going to do good things, great things, if given the opportunity. Now, if he were a football player, we could find the potential in Jarvis. We could harness that and bring him on in. But because he's simply a student, some of our universities are not making the extra effort to go and find the diamonds in the rough. I'm not going to call them names, but some of our universities are just not doing it. But if I wanted to call names, I could. Because I'm a member of the Cougar family. I've paid the dues to say what I'm saying about the University of Houston. I'm a graduate grade institution. I helped to bring the African Studies program here. I helped to open the doors for more minority faculty and better scholarships for all students. I give money to this university, money I don't have for scholarships. I've been on the alumni board. I helped to organize the Black Alumni Association. I'm a season ticket holder to football and basketball, even when we're losing in basketball. I've helped the university and the state legislature. I've paid my dues. As a matter of fact, my son is here. I even still pay tuition to this institution. So I'm a member of the Cougar family. And when you're a member of a family, you can brag on your family. But then you can also criticize your family. And here's the criticism. Let us not get so caught up in tier one that we get tier crazy. I am absolutely for this school being the brightest star it can possibly be in academic excellence. But I believe that you can have a corresponding trend. Academic excellence without losing the number of enrolled black students at the school. I absolutely believe that you can make an active effort to be tier one and still bring in minority students in the barrio and let them succeed. I absolutely believe you can be tier one and be the best possible neighbor to your folks in Third Ward and provide educational opportunities to kids in Third Ward. I absolutely believe you can spend your university dollars as a tier one school, not just with big businesses, but with small businesses and women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses. There is no contradiction. It's a question of how you identify yourself. Because we could identify ourselves as the University of Houston, doing things that UT and A&M are not even dreaming about. It just takes courage on our part. And it takes a little bit of impetus from people who are in the audience. You know, I said change is inevitable. And we all need to be about being part of that change. We can change our surroundings. We can change the future. But we got to work on it. Thank you very much.